steps. I think what you do is you go down that path, you collect your data, you measure your success, and then you determine what adjustments you would make to make sure your program is even more successful. And I think Washington needs to get there. I think there's some value in two states being adjacent to each other with an aggressive port of entry program because you begin to control importation on a larger geographical area. But we still have the other challenges that he identified to figure out if we're going to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Skelly. A 1-minute rebuttal.
I don't think I'll rebut this one. I think Todd's right. Idaho has a great program going right now, and I pass through it. I don't bring my boat through it, even though I have a sea kayak. But I certainly think that Idaho is ahead of us on this. And that is just surprises me to no end because of that. When you look at Idaho. But I do think the Washington State Legislature will recognize this problem, and I think this is one that not only will we start getting the port of entry checked, but we need to get a lot more education out there to these boaters concerning this issue and have them clean their trailers and boats every time they pull out of a lake or go to a lake. And it's just a matter of education, just like anything else, and enforcement, and then it'll take place.
A few people on the lake have chosen to pollute the lake by discarding their old docks at the southeast end. Would you support cleaning up this lake hazard by having the county participate in by donating manpower and equipment to the effort? Mr. Noki, 2 minutes.
Absolutely. And first of all, we're currently doing this. When we talk about kind of at that southeast end by the gates, I think it's once or twice a year we actually bring our Geiger work crews out, and they assist us in doing that. It's kind of like better put them to work in the community than just have them sitting in their cells. So they come out, and so it gives us an opportunity to provide the labor at the lowest possible cost. And so we've been doing that. We've been able to handle what I consider the smaller debris. What we have not been able to do is the large debris that requires some specialized equipment to be able to remove that debris from the waterways and then be able to load it on some sort of equipment to take it away. So we need to kind of figure that out. I need to go actually stand there and kind of look at what type of equipment we might need to do that. So that's the first thing. Absolutely, we're certainly able to provide labor now. We're doing that, but we probably need to take a look at specialized equipment to remove the larger stuff. The second thing I would suggest is that we do look at a county ordinance with regard to people who cut loose their docks. They create a safety hazard for the others that are boating on the lake, and I think we do need the ordinance to do that. And we also need to ask the help of the property owners. If you see somebody doing that, we need to report them. You know, it's worse than illegal dumping because there's a safety issue. The third issue, or the third point that I wanted to make on this one is, you know, we do clean green shipping programs all over the county where people bring their material. And perhaps what we need to do is if this is a large-scale issue, maybe we need to sponsor kind of a dock removal program where if they take it to a certain access point on a certain weekend, we have the equipment to remove them, cut them up, haul them out, to provide that service like we do, like say with limbs when we ask people to do their spring cleanup and try to cut down on wildfire hazards.
Mr. Skelly, 2 minutes.
Well, I agree with Todd on this. There's just no question. It's a shameful thing to be doing is dumping any kind of debris in a lake or towing your dock off to one end. They eventually rot and sink to the bottom sometimes and leaves a lot of nails. It's just a tragedy that happens. You see it all over the place. But having said that, I would go to another pot of money, and that's the engineers. The engineers, road engineers, transportation engineers, the engineering department in general has a lot of money. And there are excesses spent out of that budget that even I couldn't believe. But there is enough money there to take care of $5,000 or $10,000 worth of removal to clean up this lake. And just about any lake out here if there's a problem like that. I'm not just specifically pointing at Newman Lake out there. You know, for instance, the county commissioners gave $225,000 to the Greater Spokane Incorporated. Every year, they give them $225,000. So I think I would remove $5,000 from there and get this public safety issue taken care of. Remove those docks, get them loaded up. You know, when I have a problem, I just go out and get a bobcat and fix it. I don't worry about it too much. The engineers have all kinds of equipment. It doesn't take a lot of thought. You have to get a shoreline permit, I'm sure. You know, something and have some DOE involved. But still, you can get them towed over, pulled out of there, and we'll get the money for it. I can guarantee it.
Mr. Milkey, 1 minute rebuttal.
Sure. First of all, with regard to the engineers, that's the road fund. That's the fund that maintains your roads. I just had a meeting with the person that does our pavement management program earlier this afternoon, and every year we're $14 million behind maintaining our roads. And so to say that the road department is flush with money, I don't think is an accurate reflection on where we are. The challenges that we're having is the large annexation in the West Plains of Spokane County, the largest one in 100 years. All the property that was part of that annexation was taken off the road fund property tax rolls. So that's less money. The North Division, what I call the North Division Costco annexation, that was about $1.6 million out of the county coffers. That also took money off the road fund. So I don't think the road fund is a source that we can tap. But I do agree that they have equipment that we should be able to utilize in some way, shape, or form to maybe assist with the issue.
What will you do to keep the lakes, rivers, and streams of Spokane County clean? Mr. Viscelli, 2 minutes.
I have a long history of environmental activism. There's no question about that. Even despite that, I was elected 9 different times. I have worked hard to ensure that our rivers are staying clean and taken care of. I'm looking for my spot here. Oh, there we go. During my time as commissioner, I banned motorized watercraft off the upper Spokane River as much as possible. I wanted it completely banned year-round, but unfortunately I couldn't get another commissioner to go with me on that. But I did work at that. I worked for years on behalf of Conservation Futures, not only as a volunteer Parks Department Advisory Committee member for 8 years, and a Planning Commission member for a year, but also as a county commissioner for 9 years. And that gave me the best way to, ability to adopt conservation lands. For instance, the McKinsey property. But also a lot of different lands that are adjacent to waterways. For instance, the Fern conservation land I will live next to here shortly. And so it's a lot of years of activism. I was a member of the Nature Conservancy for 12 years. I'm a member of the Washington Wildlife Recreation Coalition, which hardly any of you would probably recognize, but it's the same group that funded Antoine Peak up here. It's the group that takes the $100 million the capital budget from Olympia gives them, and they spend it on parks and projects and land and open space and wildlife habitat throughout the state. And that's the group I'm involved with. There's about 50 of us, and we sit there and divvy out that money.
Mr. Milkey, 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. Well, I don't belong to a lot of organizations and groups, but I've spent the last 8 years working on what I think is the largest impacting program to this entire region, and that is how we deal with wastewater in a way that protects and cleans up the Spokane River and protects our aquifer. And it's considered one of the most complex negotiations in the United States. It's because the watershed starts in Idaho, where they use the federal water, the Clean Water Act standards. It crosses the state line into Washington, where we use our own standards, and then it goes into a sovereign nation known as the Spokane Tribe of Indians that have their own standards as well. And so, so everyone said this effort was going to fail. And if it would have failed, we would have run out of wastewater capacity. We would have not been able to convert 40,000 septic systems that directly are over the aquifer because there was no sewer capacity to handle it. So that's what was at stake. We would have seen a region-wide moratorium on all new construction that had anything with regard to plumbing in, commercial or residential. So here's what we have. We worked our way through it. And what we did is we ended up with a facility that, yes, it did adjust rates. I have to admit, it adjusted people's rates by about $15 a month for those that are county sewer customers. But what we got is we got the most advanced facility anywhere in the United States, probably in the top 10 in the world with regard to phosphorus removal. We're removing 95% more phosphorus than the Spokane plant downstream. And if we didn't have that plant, those flows would go. Just so happens this technology also removes close to 95% of the PCBs that are in that system as well. So we're making great strides. We have delegations coming from China. We have delegations coming from Dubai to look at this facility, and we're moving forward. The other thing I'll just say is I also pushed hard with regard to phosphorus limitations in this county. And I know some people don't like it. I hope the Q&A asked more about it. But essentially, it was a lot cheaper option than the next technology that would have taken people's rates to over $100 a month.
Mr. Skelly, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, I'm glad Todd mentioned the wastewater treatment plant, because Kate, Phil, and I are the ones who chose the property, chose the methodology that was used, and chose the company. Design, build, operate. That was a standard. But I want to move on to something else. The tanks over the aquifer. That's another thing I saw as a major problem. They were discussing the Burlington Northern tank out here at Bradford. I thought, well, what do our tanks look like if that tank, if they're going to be putting this tertiary protection on that one tank? Oh, brother. At any rate, we passed an ordinance to get protections under all these large, huge hazardous tanks when I was a commissioner, and I just do simply because I saw the problem there with the Burlington Northern. We also passed an ordinance to prevent dust oiling within a certain distance of any creek, stream, or river, or lake. And that was a real crucial thing that had to be taking place. If you look at your neighbors, they're all, if they have dust, they're all spreading dust oil on or dust oil to prevent the dust. That all washes into your water. We prevented that at least to a certain extent.
Finally, of the previous questions, we have the following. What will you do to preserve the open spaces in the county that make it a nice place to live? Mr. Nucky?
Certainly. One of the first things that I did after being elected is made the Conservation Futures Program permanent. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, essentially what it does is it sets aside a small piece of your property tax to purchase open space so that we have those spaces set aside as the community grows. It becomes impossible and very expensive to try to purchase those lands, whether they are developed as fully developed parks or whether they are left as natural areas. It becomes very difficult to try to find parkland, recreation land after the development's already there. So this gives us a fund of money to go forward. When I got to this position, that issue had to be renewed. I think it was every 4 years. And instead we said, this is a good strategy that's for this community on a long-term basis to be able to do that. And I think that's important because, again, we're going out there and we've been able to negotiate some great prices on property. We're getting matches from the state. And so I think we're now close to, I want to say about 9,000 acres of land in open space. The largest one is the Antoine Peak, which is a hillside on the north side of Spokane Valley. But again, since 2004 when I took office, I think we have nearly tripled or more the land mass that we have in that. I would say the most difficult one and controversial one was the YMCA property in Riverfront Park. And the question was, should we only have open space in rural areas that are difficult, frankly, for some people to get to? And I don't think that's the intent. I think open spaces in urbanized areas are just as important. And for those of you who've been down there, I don't know how the Y ever was built in the first place at that location, but it is a panoramic view second to none. And I think it's one that we leave for future legacies, for future generations. And I fought really hard on several occasions when that project was about to die.
Mr. Riskelli, 2 minutes.
Yeah, and I thank Todd for that. I think that YMCA property is absolutely crucial. And I think the commissioners really stepped up and funded it. And that was a step that I have to give him 100%. I remember writing an article, or a letter to the editor, to the Spokane Review, and ripping them apart for having 5 different editorials against putting, using conservation futures money on that YMCA property. And I thought that was not just a single article against it. They were just beating it to death. And I really ripped on it because it was important that was preserved for future generations. And Todd is right. It's not just large wetlands or large pieces of property that need to be taken care of. It's also the urban areas, because they have areas that people go into a lot more than the rural areas. I bet if you could count on 2 hands, your fingers of 2 hands, how many people visit a lot of the rural area conservation areas. But, you know, those are preserved for birds and deer and wildlife and protecting our water. But we put together, when I was a commissioner, I tried every time it came up for a vote to get it done, just like Todd finally did, get all the voters to do it permanently, because it was that important to him. But I never was able to convince another commissioner to do that. But nevertheless, I think that's a really important project. Open space is really important to me. Like I said, I've worked throughout the state with other organizations to preserve open space, and I'm going to continue to do that whether I'm a commissioner or not, because it's that important.
Anything in terms of a rebuttal, Mr. Martinez?
Just a quick observation. You know, I put myself through college working in the state senate, and so I can look back approximately 28 years when I first got involved in public policy. And back then, what people listed for basic infrastructure were water, roads, and sewer. Today, 28 years later, when I ask people to say, well, what do you consider basic roads, I'm sorry, roads, water, sewer. Today, when I ask people about basic infrastructures, they say roads, water, sewer, and parks. And I go back and I'm trying to understand that. And the reason why is you know, this state, right, wrong, or indifferent, has a growth management act. When I was growing up, most parcels were a lot larger. You could have the world kickball finalists in somebody's backyard. Yards have gotten smaller. And so what happens is you get people living close together. They need a little bit of elbow room. They need a place for the kids to play. They need a place for them to walk the dog. And so I think what's happened is as parcels have become smaller, the public has said, we believe open space and parks is now basic infrastructure. And we expect you to reflect that in public policies and plan for that for our future.
Okay, that's the 11 questions, and now I'm going to submit to you. Would you like to, just hear closing remarks, would you like to have me choose a question out of the 4 excellent ones I have here to have the 2 candidates respond to? Another question? One more question, okay. Here's your question. I'm speaking in the first person for whoever wrote it, I'm not sure who it is. When I first returned to Newman Lake and encountered a problem with regard to shore erosion, I called the county to find out what I would be allowed to do. The response from my neighbors and family was, whatever you do, never call the county. What would you do to improve the county's image and relationship with the Newman Lake residents? Mr. Rich Skelly, in this order, you will have 2 minutes.
Well, that's a sad commentary on county. I have a great deal of faith in the majority of the county employees I worked with for 9 years. And I think the idea that a public employee is either lazy or anything that has a bad connotation to it is absolutely false. And that goes for the state as well. I worked for the state for 6 years, and I feel the same way about the state employees I work with. You can approach any county employee, and they will be as nice to you and answer your questions. I find this every time I call the county now, or I call the Board of Health, or not Board of Health, the Health District, or any public organization. I get incredible good feelings from these people about how they answer the question, how polite they are. So it's a difficult concept for me to think that somebody said don't call the county, because you know, I had to go through a permitting system recently for a house, and I found them exceptionally intelligent and hardworking, and so I would encourage anybody to call the county, because they are good people and they will answer your questions. For instance, the 3 people who work on the Newman Lake Flood Control District, especially Mary Ann, she's been here for years and years, a dedicated professional, and very knowledgeable. So if you have any questions about these things, and I found one question about staff almost amazing to me, because staff are your eyes and ears. They're your advocates. It's at the county commissioner level that things get changed. So don't think staff isn't working 100% for you. They are. When it comes to the county commissioners, then you start to get some political play in there, or private property rights or whatever. That's where the Republican-Democrat thing starts to work. But at staff level, always go to staff.
Mr. Nucky, 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I think what I've witnessed is staff responds in a way that they think is reflective of their leadership. It really is a top-down kind of thing. And so what I've found is in times where staff believes that Spokane County wants to be more restrictive than anyone else, that's how they've interpreted the rules, more restrictive than anyone else. And John referred earlier that the county has paid out millions of dollars in settlements. He's right. And almost every one of those was in instances where our staff tried to be very restrictive and deny somebody their permit. We got sued. We were found to be in violation of giving that person their due process rights. And when you violate somebody's constitutional rights, you pay big. And you're right, those settlements are big. But they've almost always been for being too restrictive rather than being less restrictive. So the philosophy starts at the top. And one of the things that we've been working on is, number one, that our regulations are in line with the other communities that we compete with and that people compare us to. Are our restrictions reasonable? Are regulations reasonable compared to others? And so what we've tried to do is take that top-down philosophy, so where staff says, I'm going to be solution-oriented. And instead of just saying, no, you can't do that, and hang up the phone, they're saying, well, what is it actually you're trying to accomplish? Here's a path that you can take. You can't take the path you want to take, but here's a path you could take that might get you there. And I think that's important. The other thing that I've been working on for the last 3 years is the update to our Shoreline Management Act. And one of the things, when you're working within a certain number of feet of the shoreline, there are 2 philosophies. One philosophy is absolutely you are not allowed to touch it. Stay out. I have a different philosophy, which says we're supposed to protect that buffer, and sometimes we can do a better job to protect it, which means we go in and we maintain it. Sometimes we plant better vegetation, but that's part of the ongoing battle right now on the Shoreline Management Act is it no man's land, or is it an area that we're all going to work to make sure it works?
Mr. Skelly, 1 minute rebuttal.
I really don't have a rebuttal.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. With that being said, we're going to give each candidate 3 minutes for closing remarks, and then if you stay around, I'll tell you what's next. You can stay on and ask one-on-one questions, or go into the dessert social or whatever. But I'm going to ask Mr. Nucky to take the podium first. And
Since I opened first, I thought it was last. Are we not first?
First, and first last.
First. All right. Thank you much. Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. It's always great to get out and talk to folks and listen to their concerns. I want to start off addressing the 3 reasons that my opponent started off with. First of all, he said that the Board of County Commissioners needs to change because if you're of the same party, you must be of the same mind. Anyone that witnessed Phil Harris and Kate McCaslin work together knows that 2 Republicans do not come from the same mind. And I'd like to believe that we're mature enough to understand that people come from different backgrounds, we have different experiences in life, and the issue is it's really not about, and shouldn't be, about partisanship. And I'll come back to that. Instead, it should be about doing what the people need to do and making sure that this community, and we're providing the services the community needs. Number 2, he talked about somehow I've supported a 5/10 increase in sales tax. it's interesting because when he announced he was running for office, it was only 4 tenths. I don't know where the 5th tenth came from. But what's interesting is 2 of the ballot issues where the voters approved a 0.1% sales tax increase started in 1996. Were first put on the ballot in 1996 when John Ross Kelly was the county commissioner. All they did was come up for renewal under my term, and yet somehow I'm getting blamed for initiating those discussions. That's the first 2. The third one, which is the public safety sales tax, came on the ballot in 2004. Folks, I didn't take office until November. I didn't put it on the ballot. And so, so I find that interesting. And then, and I've already mentioned with regard to the millions of dollars in settlements. What this really comes down to is in local government, unlike the legislature, you don't have the ability as a leader just to say no. My job is to make things work, and what's really difficult is sometimes I have to figure out how to implement things that I voted against as a legislator. But my oath of office says I uphold the law, and I'm supposed to implement what the law tells me to do. And that's the difficulty. I think leadership is really about how to find solutions and implement solutions. And I think in the last 8 years we've done that. We've taken on some hugely complex issues, whether it's how to bring a wastewater treatment facility online through this whole myriad of regulations, whether it's how to replace 30-year-old emergency communication systems, how to bring back crime check, and the list continues on. We're making some great strides. We're doing good, positive stuff. I will leave you with this. I am a firm believer that good public policy makes good politics. It's not the other way around. I get offended because too many public office holders start with the politics first. If it sounds good as a soundbite, then that's what I want to pursue, and maybe that'll decide what the public policy is. I've never believed that. I'm a staunch defender. We set out and we do what makes sense for everyone and let the politics sort themselves out later. That's who I am. That's what I'm about. In every program, I ask, what is your goal? What is your strategy? And how are you going to measure progress? And I will continue to ask that on your behalf. Thank you for the opportunity to hear about it.
Well, I want to say one thing about your proposed budget. I noticed that your milfoil control budget was cut in half, and I think that was a state grant. Still, county commissioners should make that up. You've got a major problem with milfoil. You need to hit it hard and hit it now. You cannot wait. It's going to go all over your lake. So to cut your budget is just unbelievable to me. And it's not maybe Todd's fault, but he didn't add to it. So you can bet that I would have got on this and nailed it hard, because you're not going to get rid of it until you do. I find it kind of interesting. Todd talks about leadership, and yet when it came down to millions of dollars they squandered on land use issues, the first people he blamed was staff. Did you hear that? It was staff. Staff did this, staff did that. A leader does not takes responsibility, does not blame staff. So I'll go with that. When I was a county commissioner, I'll just move on to what I think is important that I accomplished. When I was in there, 1996, first year, we passed the critical areas ordinance. We had to get this done because it was state law. It hadn't been done. It should have been done quite a bit before that. We finally got it right on. I came in November 1995. We passed it shortly thereafter. I didn't get a chance to really hone in on it because I would change it completely today. But we managed to get it on the books. The comprehensive plan took us 3 years to get that thing done. It should have been done a lot sooner, but staff needed to, hone this in. We had a lot of public meetings, and they did a fantastic job of getting this thing written. So we only had like 2 challenges to the comprehensive plan, almost unheard of in the state of Washington. So that was another big item. And throughout the years, we didn't sit on our laurels and wait for something to happen. We went and got after it. The hazardous waste tank ordinance. I saw the problem, convinced the other commissioners that it was important to get it done, and we got it done. Unfortunately, the tank owners, thumbed their nose at us and said, we're UTC, we don't have to follow your rules and regulations. But one day that ordinance is going to go back on, and they're going to have a major spill over the aquifer of 3 million gallons, and then they're going to have to eat that ordinance. Cell phone tower ordinance, I talked about that, same deal. We saw a problem, we got on it, we passed it. It took a while, public input, but it got taken care of. Signage. We got onto this on the billboards. They were starting to proliferate. Everywhere there was an industrial piece of land. Now, yes, there are billboards, but there are no more in Spokane County. They were banned. You know, I can't stop it from the city of Spokane Valley. I can't stop it from the city of Spokane. But you're not looking at billboards everywhere you look where there's industrial, because we got on it. These are just a few examples of the things that Kate, Phil, and I accomplished in the 9 years, the 8 years Kate was there that took place. I could ignore this, but I'm not. I could have answered every question that Todd answered today exactly the same words, because I had his list, I had his cheat sheet. He just went to staff and said, you know, answer these questions for me. I did my homework. I came out here, I looked at your comp plan, I looked at everything else that you had on your website. That's when I made my decision on how to answer these questions. So there's a real big difference between the two of us. So I guess that's it. I really appreciate you having me out here today, and I ask for your vote in